but our lives. And we're thankful for that. I think the good Lord, He had His hand on us.
And with just 21 days to the midterm elections, there's the slimmest of chance that we can start to turn things around. Republicans hold a decided advantage as they turn out to vote in midterms in much better proportion than the left. But is it possible that this time there might be enough rage to at least take back the U.S. House of Representatives and perhaps have a historic victory or two, like in the Georgia governor's race and in the U.S. Senate seat in Mississippi? There's so many stories to talk about this week. You can join us with your questions or comments at 833-255-7171. You can also send us a tweet at FireFilms, FireFilmz, or leave a comment on the website. We'll also be joined tonight by our resident political science expert, Val Atkinson, to give us some additional insight. But before we do any of that, let's take a small pause and we'll be right back with your calls and Val Atkinson. You're watching The Deal TV.
If you have serious losses and you don't think your insurance is going to cover it, or you don't have insurance, FEMA may be able to provide some assistance in the form of a grant. By law, FEMA cannot duplicate insurance payments. Money from FEMA may be available for you to rent a place to live temporarily while you make repairs and figure out your next steps. You may be able to get assistance to live somewhere else if your primary residence is uninhabitable because of Florence. FEMA programs aren't designed to make people whole, but you may be able to get some rental assistance to live somewhere temporarily and some money for basic home repairs that you would not have to repay. Then we work with other organizations who are providing additional assistance as well.
The help the SBA has is in the form of low-interest loans to help people recover and rebuild and get back to where they were before Hurricane Florence hit. We help businesses of all sizes and homeowners and renters with the larger sums of money they're going to need to rebuild their home, to replace their furniture and their clothing, the things that they had as just part of their normal life. If you're referred to SBA, fill out and return that application, even if you don't think you can afford a loan, because if we look at it and say, you know, you're right, you can't, we will then refer you back to FEMA potentially for additional grant assistance.
Good evening and welcome to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. Thanks for joining us on our second episode of The Deal. And folks, there's just so much news to cover tonight. In the opening montage, we talked about all the different stories. Our president went on 60 Minutes on Sunday to tell us exactly how he thinks he's doing in the White House. And unfortunately, he's in an alternate reality. Joining us tonight again will be Val Atkinson, our resident political science professor, to help us guide us through all the news of the week. But in the meantime, again, we want to send out all our thoughts and prayers to the folks that are out there that are still suffering from the hurricane damage, Florence, and then Michael on its heels. And it had another effect here in the Triangle as well. But, you know, the folks in Florida, this utter devastation, and we'll talk about that amongst other things tonight. So without further ado, let's bring in our resident political science expert. He's joined us all the way from Holly Springs, North Carolina. It's Val Atkinson. Val, welcome back to The Deal.
Thank you so much, Ed, and it's a pleasure to be here with you.
So Val, you know, like I said, there's so much news to cover tonight. One of the things that has really been bothering me is that the president seems to think that he's a dictator, and he's now actually speaking on behalf of foreign governments, in this case the Saudi government. In the opening montage, we showed a clip of Jamil Khashoggi, who's a journalist with the Washington Post. He had worked at a number of other papers as well. He had gone into the Turkish embassy and disappeared and not been seen in the last 2 weeks. And by all indications, it looks like a hit squad from Saudi Arabia was sent to take him out. Now, the president says it was a rogue hit squad. Let's just go ahead and start with international news tonight. How does the president know they were a rogue hit squad, for one? And two, what does it mean that our president is actually telling the story that the Saudi government wants to be told?
Well, he sort of let the cat out of the bag, Ed, early on when he talked about the amount of money that would be lost or possibly could go to the Russians or the Chinese if we didn't act right or play ball as we should with the Saudis. You can't put money, you should not put money ahead of lives here. Not with the tune of, say, $100 billion, because what will it be the next time? A few thousand or less? It's a type of thing that presidents should get out in front of, set the example, and show not only our people here in America, but people all around the world what real, true democracy is, what we mean by our Constitution when we say we the people, when we talk about by and for the people. He needs to be setting that tone everywhere, all over the globe.
Right.
He's doing just the opposite.
So you know, in one of the clips that we showed early on, the president was in the White House in the Oval Office with a pastor from North Carolina who had been held in Turkey as a prisoner, was released. The president says that he did not negotiate for the pastor's release. However, I kind of find that dubious under the circumstances. President Trump has said flattering things about Erdogan, who's by all accounts a dictator. And I don't think Erdogan would have let the pastor out, on his own volition. Had you followed that story at all, and do you understand what was behind his arrest and subsequent release?
Well, it appears right now that the heat is really coming down on the Saudis and on Washington. And as the Turkish government has put out, they meaning the Saudis, are looking for a way to admit that, in fact, there was a kidnapping, there was torture, there was murder. And they're trying to do it in such a way that it saves face, if you can talk about that in the same sentence as torture. But it looks as though Trump finds himself in a position to try to save money while the actual people that committed this heinous crime are trying to save face. And I don't think either the United States people or the Saudis or any other people around the globe are going to go for this. And I think there's going to be some reckoning to be done. I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg here. And I'd like to say something to our listeners. Mark my words and say that Val Atkinson was one of the first who mentioned this, but put a tick mark down by the name of Mr. Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, as it relates to this Saudi issue. And we'll come back and visit this in a few weeks and we'll see.
So do you think, well, I know you said to wait a couple of weeks, but is the implication that his relationship with the Saudis has something to do with how things are playing out? Give us a tease on what you think is going on here with Jared Kushner.
Oh, absolutely. Jared is documented that he talked about some people that were not being loyal to the Saudi regime. Mm-hmm. And then a week or so later, they disappeared. Wow. And at the same time, it happened a subsequent time. But on the third issue, we find that all of a great deal of Kushner's financial woes had disappeared all of a sudden. And he was no longer underwater on some of his properties. So, like I said, just put a tick mark by that. We'll come back and visit this a little later.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, and I think you're right. There is something to be found there once we uncover some of the other stones that need to be overturned here. I want to remind the folks you're listening to the deal and looking at the deal. We're so used to being on radio, Val, that you're also looking at the deal. And if you want to participate, you can. The number to call is 833-255-7171. I've seen some callers pop in. You got to be patient. We have an auto screener on, so they'll ask you your name and what you want to talk about. Go ahead and give them their information and get into the queue. 833-255-7171 is the number to call. And we'd like to hear from you and talk about the things you want to talk about. Let's switch off of international issues for just a second and talk about some national things that are really national. I saw some numbers in some of the congressional races. They keep talking about this generic poll that the Democrats are up by this amount, or the Republicans are up by this amount, or in the Senate, the Republicans seem to have the advantage, and in the House, the Democrats seem to have that advantage. What do you have to say about the polling? We know the polling was wrong to some degree. It was right in total numbers, but the outcome of the 2016 elections were off. You know, Hillary was supposed to win going away. But talk to me about what you think about the polling that's going on now and all the results they're talking about are supposed to happen on Election Day this time.
Mr. Silverman, who's one of the nation's premier polling experts, I think he's got it exactly right when he says that it all depends upon the assumptions you make going into designing your poll, your survey, when you start doing your sampling. And for an example, if you decide that in the 2018 midterm elections, that the vast majority of people that show up to the poll are going to be white males over the age of 55, then your polling has dictated who you go out and sample. And in that way, if you are wrong in that, your whole polling is off. And so what we've got to watch for is what are people using for their sampling base and their data to indicate who should be represented in their sample. And because if that's off, they have a big problem. That's one of the reasons you want to use several different polling organizations that have used different representation. One who believe that Democrats are excited and they're going to have a big turnout. One that believes that the 53% of white women that voted for Donald Trump didn't do it by accident, so they weight their polling in that direction. Another say that the party in power doesn't do well during midterms, so they weight their polling in that direction. So if you get 5, 6, 7, 8 of these polling organizations to submit their findings and you run an average on them, you may be pretty close. But I think what is dangerous if you take the information from one polling organization and use that as fact.
So taking all of that, now I'm going to ask you to make a prediction. What's really going to happen then? So if the polls are only a reflection of the people that they're talking to, what does it mean for, folks? I mean, obviously you want to go vote regardless of what the polls are saying anyway. You want to vote your conscience or whatever. But what do you make of what you see about how things are going to turn out on Election Day? Will the Democrats be able to take the House?
I believe the Democrats will take the House, Ed, but I think it's going to be a lot closer than people suggest that it will. We have something called a Wilder factor, which means that a lot of people who are polled don't want to tell the caller that they will be voting for the ultra-conservative, the racist, the misogynist, the whatever. So they tell you they're going to vote for the other person, when in fact they plan on voting for the racist all the time. It started with Doug Weiler and then Tom Bradley in California. All of these people had sizable leads going into the final day and end up squeaking out by 1 percentage point, did Doug Weiler. And in the gubernatorial race for Tom Bradley, he lost. And both of these guys had big leads going into the race. So we have to watch that and be careful that we don't get overexcited, and we do whatever is necessary to go out and cast our votes. Because one other thing I'd like to leave with your listening audience, viewing audience head, is that don't fall for the hype about fundraising. There are tons of races that the person who raised and spent the least amount of money won the race. And it could happen again. So just because Democrats are beating Republicans to the bank and raising more money than they are, doesn't necessarily convert into an automatic victory.
Well, let's talk about that real quick. Yeah, Beto O'Rourke in Texas has raised, I think the estimate was $30 million so far, something crazy like that.
3 times the amount.
Yeah, so an astronomical amount of money has been raised in that Texas Senate race. But the last poll I saw before we came on the air still had Ted Cruz up by 9. And Ted Cruz may be the most unpopular person in the Senate. How do you account for, you already explained that raising the most money doesn't always mean you win, but how do you account for Ted Cruz's unpopularity and then him still maintaining the lead in that race in Texas?
Well, it's the same thing we said about Donald Trump in 2016. Those people down there are not voting for Ted Cruz. They are voting against what Ted Cruz and his ilk are telling them will happen if they don't send a Republican to the United States Senate. They are voting against that. They are voting against Black and brown people. They are voting against women taking over. They are voting against people having abortions and same-sex marriages and all. That's what they are voting against. Ted Cruz just happens to be the beneficiary of that mindset. They're not voting for Ted Cruz, though.
Don't get it. Let's not get it twisted, right? But so Beto O'Rourke is a very attractive candidate. He may make some waves on the national front in the years to come. But is there ever an opportunity to overturn Texas? I keep looking at the numbers in Texas. It's 40-some% Hispanic, has a large Asian population, especially in that Houston area, people from Vietnam and Laos and places like that. Houston has a very large African-American population. What is it going to take in a place like Texas to at least turn it purple so it's like North Carolina or Virginia where there's opportunities for the Democrats?
Well, take that 40% number you talked about as far as Hispanics. They may be 40% of the population, but in terms of registered voters, their numbers are far, far down. And that's what's going to happen over a period of time. Hispanics are going to have to get registered to vote, turn out to vote, and send a message to prospective winners of elections that you can depend upon Hispanics going to the poll and vote. Because what we say is people, they make their actions based on what they anticipate the electorate will do. If you belong to a group that they have already assessed goes to the poll often and votes their wishes all the time, then they won't say things in their campaign. They won't do things when they're in office to upset you at all. So that's what the Hispanics have got to do. They've got to get registered and show up in off-year elections, midterm elections, show up in presidential elections, get a few people elected to office at lower seats and one or two at a high visible position, and start that record moving. I don't think it'll happen within the next election cycle or two. It's a little ways down the road.
Well, let's talk about the reality of voter suppression throughout the United States, and perhaps in a place like Texas where Hispanics may be afraid to register. I did see a couple of pieces over the last couple of weeks where folks have gone to a courthouse just to handle court business or maybe to testify in a court case or whatever, and then all of a sudden you see officials from, immigration there to pick them up, to arrest them. What do you think is that having an impact on maybe Hispanics not been playing the kind of role that we think they're going to play in these elections because, frankly, they're afraid.
Absolutely, it does. And just as an aside here, that was the impotence or one of the reasons Republicans wanted to make a change in the census collecting status for 2020. They want to put a question in there about citizenship because they think that will put fear in the hearts and minds of people who are Asian, Hispanic background. When they ask you a question, are there any people living in your household who are not American citizens? And they start saying no, and they may have an uncle and or an aunt that are living there that are counted in the census as it is now, but they're afraid to say that they are there under the new system. So I think conservatives have found that it's going to be very difficult for them to win an election with this small tent idea. And they don't want to, or they cannot expand their tent. So this means that they have to stop out people outside of their tent from voting the best they can. So that's why you see the voter suppression going on with Black people and brown people and LGBT communities. And so it's a kind of thing that they've made a critical decision as far as their way forward politically in the United States. And that is, we can't expand our tent, so we must stop the people outside of our tent from participating.
So the whole voter suppression thing is going to be critical in a lot of races. One race in particular that's getting a lot of attention around the country is the Georgia governor's race. To get away from the Congress for just a minute, Stacey Abrams has an opportunity to be the first African-American woman governor of any state, and then a southern state on top of that. And then over in Mississippi, Mike Espy, who worked in the Clinton administration but was also in Congress. The last polls I saw is pretty tight race there in Mississippi for the U.S. Senate seat. In both cases, but especially in Georgia, we see that the Secretary of State, who's running against Stacey Abrams, is holding 53,000 voter registrations, and 70% of those are African American. Can you talk about what's going on there? Why is he even still the Secretary of State?
Well, let me give you an analogy here, a metaphor. I'd like to on air right now challenge LeBron James to a game of one-on-one basketball. And I will guarantee you I will win. I'll put up odds. I give you 100-to-1 odds that I'll win if you allow me to be the referee as well. And that is exactly what has happened here, is you got a person who's running for governor, the highest seat in the state, and the Secretary of State is the person who has to certify the results. The Secretary of State is the one who says, this is a true bill, this is what happened, there are no shenanigans going on, or he has to say, we need a recount, or we need to do this, that, and the other. He now has the power to make those decisions about his own race, and that should not be.
Right.
He should have that authority to do so. So it's problematic, and because the race is going to be close already, because of the overarching racial issue here we're dealing with, and the gender issue we're dealing with. It's going to be close.
Right.
And 53,000 votes back because of some matching issue, as it's called. Because, for an example, you could say Val Atkinson, and my driver's license says H. Val Atkinson. They would take my name off the roll.
Right, right.
There's a problem here.
And we've seen that around the country. Let's talk about North Carolina, where we are, real quick. One of the things that I read a New York Times article a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that some people have been doing here is some counties have been actually charging people with voter fraud, dragging them into court for very minor things, like maybe information not being correct on their voter registration, or them having moved or whatever. Or in the case of one case I read, the person was on probation, understood that they could vote, or at least thought they could vote, but nobody at the Board of Elections cleared that up. Again, I think that's just voter intimidation. We've been a little bit lucky here in North Carolina that some of the things they wanted to do, they haven't been able to do. But what are the Republicans going to do in a place like North Carolina where they clearly are the minority, right? But they run everything in Raleigh. What are the Republicans up to here in North Carolina?
Well, one of the things that non-Republicans need to be leery of is the fact that now that Republicans have both houses of the state legislature, and now that they are trying to pass bills, and I know we'll get to this in a minute, amendments, I should say, to take away power from the sitting governor, they feel emboldened to do whatever it is they need to do. Now, one of the reasons they had all of these charges filed in various counties around the state for voter fraud is there's always been the question that comes up either at the appellate level or even sometimes at the Supreme Court level. The question is asked, how many cases of fraud have you tackled or have come up in your state over the past X years? And, they're embarrassed by that number. So what this does, this allows them to pad that number and say, yeah, the voter fraud cases are increasing now. They won't tell you that they're not being convicted of voter fraud. They'll say that the cases are increasing, and they're bringing these cases themselves. They're not finding any voter fraud to support their allegations. So that's one of the things that they're doing. I think in a positive way, Ed, what we need to make sure we get out to the prospective voter is that vote anyway. Ask for a provisional ballot, vote, and make sure that it can be cleared up later, but don't let them talk you into leaving the poll without voting, that you can come back at a later date or time to vote. You won't be able to do that.
Right.
Tell them you want to vote anyway, because at worst, if you thought you were off probation or parole or whatever, and you're not, they may take that vote away, because in North Carolina, you have to be completely removed from the criminal justice system, incarceration, probation, parole, whatever. You must be completely removed for that. And then you have to ask to be reinstated. You just can't go down and vote.
Right.
You have to go out to the State Board of Elections and say, what's my process? What is the process to regain my voting rights?
Right. I want to remind the folks that are looking at us tonight and also listening. If you're just listening, you can call in at 833-255-7171 if you want to call in. Again, be patient when the screener comes on. I guess you got to get used to the computer voice there. It's going to ask you your name and what do you want to talk about. Just leave us a little brief message. That way it gives us an opportunity to prepare for you. 833-255-7171 is the number to call. Just be patient. I know we talk a lot, and sometimes I look over at the screen, and then by the time I look over, the callers drop the call. So be patient and stay on the line. Val, I'm really concerned, though, that, again, people have this notion that it's only important to vote during the presidential election year. We know that's not the case at all. And we sort of got to get into the habit of voting regardless of what year it is, who's running, whatever, that kind of thing. I did notice one thing in particular in North Carolina this time, since we're here in Raleigh. I've been seeing some ads for even some judicial races that I didn't see in the past. How do you feel about, folks running for judicial seats? Actually, having to, run ads and that kind of thing, and being more partisan, talk about issues this time around?
Well, as long as our Constitution allows people to run for office as a political candidate for a judicial office, I think it's absolutely fair that they talk about those things that differentiates them from their opponent, because the voters need to know why should they vote for you as opposed to your opponent. You're going to have to talk about some things that makes a difference, and you need to also talk about things that you feel that your job would require you to do and how you would handle that without telling them how you would rule on a particular issue or case. I think it's fair. Now, there are some states that they have the executive, the governor, to appoint people to judgeships, all the way up and down, from district court to Court of Appeals, and also to the Supreme Court. We don't have that here in North Carolina, and I'm satisfied with the voting process. You're leaving it in the hands of the citizens. So as long as we have it that way, I would say that people running for office, judicial office, should have the ability to tell voters what they can expect should they be successful and win the office.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place for us to take a break, Val. I do want to pick back up though on voting all the time, but we got a really good PSA. I think I want people to see. So we're going to take a small break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about voting, and voting because it's so important. That's why we're here every Tuesday night through election night on The Deal. You're watching The Deal with Ed Clark and Val Atkinson.
Call Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Michelle.
Hey, Lin, are you registered to vote?
Of course. I am not throwing away my opportunity to make my voice heard this November.
If we really want our voices to be heard, we need to vote in every election, not just for president, but for every office, school board, state house, senate, all of them. Can you help me get people registered?
Okay, I'm already on it.
Well, keep up the good work.
Let's see who else we can get on this.
Yo, Lynn, what up?
Hey, Chris, we're looking to field a full team to make sure every American casts their ballot this November. It's real easy from your phone or tablet to get the info you need to vote. Also, Michelle said so.
Well, I'm on it. There's no off season for getting out to vote. Call Janelle.
No, not now. I'm registering voters. Hey, take this. 4 million Americans turn 18 this year. That's huge. And we need every last one of them to register and vote. Because let's be real. It's going to be the young people of this generation that will change the world.
It's time. Our nation requires it. Our democracy in the country we love requires our attention, voice, and participation.
When we vote, we prove that we are a democracy with a government of the people and by the people.
So every community we visit, it's important for them to know they can really make a difference if they go and vote in every election.
Absolutely.
So we're asking for your help. Help us start a conversation across America about being active participants in our most basic American responsibility, voting. Talk to your friends and family and neighbors. Tell them your hopes and dreams for your family, your community, and our country. When we all vote, we determine our future.
And welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. Thanks for joining us tonight. We're talking about the upcoming election. We're talking about our president, Donald Trump. We want to hear from you. The number to call is 833-255-7171. Again, 833-255-7171. If you want to participate, we're lucky enough to have in with us again tonight Val Atkinson, all the way from Holly Springs, North Carolina. Val, Michelle Obama and Lin-Manuel talked about the need to exercise your right to vote. Every election, I know you're fond of that. Talk to me about, why do you think it is that people don't turn out every time to vote?
Well, first of all, let me echo what Michelle Obama was saying. Steal some of her words, that democracy is not a spectator sport. it is a participatory sport. You can't have democracy by allowing someone else to do your bidding for you. That is, letting them go to the poll to vote for you. You've got to get involved yourself. And the reason that it's necessary that we all vote all the time is that, let's look at it this way, Ed. If you only went to homecoming or a family reunion or a Super Bowl once every 4 years, don't you think you'd be missing something? So that's the way we've got to take a look at voting now. It's a yearly event. It's a yearly event. What happens is we put so much attention on the presidency that too many people think that if they go out and vote for the president, they've done their job for 4 years and they don't have to worry about it again. But there are federal elections every 2 years. You have everybody in the House of Representatives running for election and re-election every 2 years. The Senate, a third of the Senate turns over every 2 years. And governors run most of them for 4-year terms. And they have, in North Carolina, for an example, they have a council of state that runs along with the governor for 4-year terms. But then we get down to the legislature, which runs for 2 years, and the municipal elections. Your county board of elections deal with county commissioners, as Michelle was talking about, water and sewage superintendents, and so many other things. But the mayoral races in cities and towns are important as well. So the point is that with your municipal races coming up on odd numbered years and your federal and state election coming up on even numbered years, there's never a year that passes that you don't have an opportunity to go cast your ballot and vote your choice, who you would like to be running your city, your town, your county, your state, or your nation. You decide that. If you don't make these decisions, then in fact, you are allowing democracy to be a spectator sport, and you're just standing back watching. And basically what you're saying is, however it comes out, I'll accept.
You know, but let's talk about some reality though. A lot of young people don't vote, or they don't understand that. What are we missing to try to get more young people to participate? The people who may be, more progressive or wherever to participate. What are we missing, not only here where we are in North Carolina, but throughout the country?
Well, I think what we have to do, we have to get on the young people's schedule. The young people is the group that I think about when I think about voting every 4 years, because their mindset, to them, a person that's 17, 18, 19 years old, 4 years is a long, long time. Mm. And it's difficult to convince them that it's not that long away, and you've got to start doing some things to prepare yourself, because you got to start thinking of it this way. The decisions you make now today about who you vote for will impact how long you have to pay back your student loan.
Right.
Which will impact when you already are able to buy a house, which impacts so many other things. So it hits you hard today, not 4 years from now or 8 or 12 years from now. It's important that you do it right now. I mean, I wish we could tie it down to say that if you vote, your student loan percentage will be X, but if you don't vote, it will stay at Y. And then you see them flock to the poll, because it's almost a self-interest type thing that drives them to participate or not.
But let's talk about reality, though. We know that in a state like North Carolina, again, I hate to always bring up the numbers, but the numbers are what they are. Registered Republicans are, about a third of the electorate. But somehow they've gained complete control almost of North Carolina. At one point they did. They had the governor's mansion. They had the lieutenant governor. They had both houses, the Senate and the House. How does that happen? Number one, how do you gain complete control and you're nowhere near being the majority?
Well, the Republicans have been working on this thing a long time, Ed. This is what we're seeing now is some things that started back in the late 60s, right after the first group of people became eligible to vote after the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That first election was in 1968. And what happened is conservatives, Republicans, and a lot of Democrats who were conservative came up with the Southern strategy. And every year since then, they've been coming up with ways to really keep people thinking that you got to stay with Republicans and conservatives to protect your rights. And they aim these messages at poor whites. Poor white people have been voting against their economic self-interest for over 50 years. And this is what has kept many Republicans in power. And this is what keeps them doing what they do with their agenda and with their talking points and with their messages. It's aimed primarily at that poor white who's been convinced that I need to stay with Republicans for whatever reasons.
Right. I've been reluctant to bring this up, but there's some African Americans that think you should vote Republican too. And in the case, I really, 40 minutes into it before I'm bringing this up, but Kanye West got invited to the White House. And sitting next to him was Jim Brown, which, really floors me, but he didn't say very much, and I'm starting to wonder if maybe he's suffering from, some football injury. But Kanye West was really off the chain. He said some choice words in the White House. We can say it here. He said the MF word out front. He told the president he was a crazy motherfucker. He couldn't believe that he was in the White House. What do you make of? I know what I think it is. Trump inviting someone like Kanye West to the White House. Why do you think Kanye West goes to the White House? Period. To begin with, what's happening with Kanye West?
Kanye West is ill-advised. Kanye West doesn't know what's going on. I'm putting it as mildly as I can. The guy's off his rocker. He has no idea how politics works. None. He has no idea how things work outside of his business genre that he works in. Getting on Donald Trump for a minute, I'll come back to Kanye. But Trump and his handlers, they were looking at trying to put a little divide in the African-American youth because they know there are a lot of African-Americans out there who love rap music and hip-hop culture and that sort of thing. Why not get a guy like Kanye West to say, I love Trump? Even if you only get one or two African-Americans to say, if Kanye is saying it, he must not be all bad. That's one or two more than you had before. George Bush tried the same thing, but with another technique when he went with his faith-based initiative and enlisted the help of several African-American ministers to go to the black church to tell them that George Bush was a good guy. Well, George Bush got 7% of the black vote in 2000. And in 2004, because of this faith-based initiatives, he upped that by 2%. He got 9% of the black vote. So Republicans are not lost on these kinds of things.
Right.
They're trying whatever is necessary to fill up their tent with people, knowledgeable people, or people who just don't know.
Well, that's my Kanye West segment. I tried not to do it, but I brought it up. But I also want to remind the folks who are watching the show, you can call in 833-255-7171. We got about 15 minutes left. I don't want to leave anybody out. Like I said, I know people have been calling in, but they're not holding on long enough. So I'd like for you to try to hang in with us. and we'll take your call as soon as we can. We got about 15 minutes left, Val. Let's talk about something really close to home, though. The 2nd District in North Carolina is an interesting race. Linda Coleman is running for a congressional seat, and there's a really good website called the Cook Political Report that it said that the race had tightened up at some point, and then it's gone. It's always been a Republican leaning seat from day one. If you look at the polls, it's a difficult district for Linda Coleman to make some inroads in because it stretches all over the place, right? You're in Wake County where you got some urban, but it's a lot rural, where you have a county like Harnett County, which is really rural. Is there any hope for a candidate like Linda Coleman, or do we have to wait until they just redraw the districts in North Carolina? The courts ruled over and over that the districts aren't good, but nevertheless, we have what we have. Is there any hope that Linda Coleman has any shot at winning that seat?
Absolutely, there is. As a matter of fact, I think she will. There's hope simply because there is dissatisfaction and there's worriness in the whole camp. He wins just because of gerrymandering. But you can gerrymander all you want. Your people still have to come out to the poll. And midterms are not going to go well for Republicans this time. They have their guy in office. They've captured the Supreme Court. They have the Senate. And they haven't lost the House yet. And people are talking about it, and I'm one of them, but they haven't lost the House yet. So they're in pretty good shape. I mean, it's not like they got to show up in droves in order to win something or even keep what they got. The president can't be put out of office because of the midterm. And every pundit you see tells you that the Senate is safe and the House is maybe. So they're not excited. They're not going to come out in droves. And that may be just enough to tip Linda Coleman over the top in this race.
Well, let's go worst case scenario because we have to. What if the Democrats don't deliver and the House stays in the hands of the Republicans, the Senate stays in the hands of the Republicans? What could kind of get things shifted in the direction of the progressives for 2020 in that case? One thing I'm thinking of is there's an investigation that's still going on that I think got put on the back burner because of the Kavanaugh hearings and his subsequent confirmation. But isn't there still an investigation going on in Washington, D.C. that we should know about?
There are tons of investigations. You talk about the Mueller group.
Well, that's the one I had in mind, but I was trying to give you an opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them still going on. And I think that the Mueller investigations are not very much unlike all investigations. They don't want to appear to be impacting an election. So for that reason, I think you can look forward to some revelations starting to build up and come out after November the 6th midterm election, maybe around mid-November, around toward the end of the month, between the mid and the end of the month, you'll start seeing some things. But I really do. You asked a question about what are the alternatives if Democrats lose the House and the Senate and everything stays as it is now. Well, that will put the Democrats in a situation where we've got to start thinking outside the box. We have been thinking inside the box, in my opinion, too long. And the inside of the box says, register everybody you can and figure out a way to get them to the poll. That's been our first, second, third, short, long, medium, high, everything goal. That's how we start and that's how we finish, is voter registration and get out the vote. We've got to start thinking outside the box. That's what the Republicans did to get to where they are. They knew they could not outvote us. So they had to figure another way to win in spite of their minority status. And they figured it out. They figured how they could be the minority party in the country and control all three branches of federal government and the majority of state legislative houses and the majority of state gubernatorial houses. How can you do that as a minority party? They did it. They did it by thinking outside the box. They went after the judges first. They trained people. They got radio stations and TV stations to carry their messages. They just did a lot of background investigations on their opposition, called opposition research. And they put all of those things together, ran certain candidates in certain places, painted candidates bad in other places to make their own people hate them. They did a lot of different things other than just get people rounded up to go to the poll to vote. And I'm saying it's going to be difficult to go back to the people in 2020 and say, we got to get our brothers and sisters and everybody out to the poll and vote because we didn't get it done in 18 and they are still in office. It's going to be hard to sell that.
Right. So one of the big issues I've been seeing with a lot of candidates and commercials across the country, I've been watching in a lot of different places, is that the Democrats have been talking about health care and the sort of the desire just to tear apart the Obamacare and then rising health care premiums and also trying to eliminate pre-existing conditions. Is that the issue to run on and that the issue that the Democrats could win with? Or what else do they have? What else can Democrats bring to the table besides health care and pre-existing conditions? What else do they need to talk about?
One of the things that Democrats really need to get smart on, Ed, is that they need to understand that most people have already made a decision about health care. For an example, most people who love Obamacare or whatever, they are already in the Democratic camp, right? Most people who hate health care are already someplace else. In other words, there's not enough people out there waiting for a candidate to tell them the difference between Obamacare and some other plan that will convince them to vote Republican or Democrat. I think Democrats are missing the boat on that. That's not the issue. You know, it's what we're running on issues like health care, minimum wage, benefits, unions, and those real issues we used to call them, right? Republicans are running on emotions. They're running on cultural issues. You know, they're running on things like same-sex marriage and abortions and busing your kids across town just to go to school with some people of color. They're running on things that tug at people's heartstrings, and that's why they get so many white people to vote against their economic self-interest, because you got white folks who are saying, you know, I know my grandmother may lose her Medicaid, or that my brother-in-law may lose his job because of the union being busted and that kind of thing. But I just can't stand to see two men marrying each other.
Right.
You know, I can't see that. So you lose this guy's vote, right? And you're over here talking to him about Medicaid when his main motivator and any salesperson will tell you about finding the person's dominant buying motive in sales is what makes this guy tick. And the fact that he, you know, owning a big Cadillac ain't his dominant buying motive. His dominant buying motive is that he sees himself driving up to the golf course in Myrtle Beach and opening the door and all of his buddies saying, oh my God, it's the prettiest Cadillac I've ever seen. That's his dominant buying motive. You can't sell him about the size of the engine or the fact that it gets to 0 to 60 in 2.8 seconds. That's not a buying motive. Democrats don't understand that yet. You got to put him at the golf course. You say, sir, when you pull up at the golf course in this, you may not be able to get in your own car. They will bomb over this thing. This is what they're going to think, that you made a great decision, which you have if you buy this car today. You know, Democrats have got to stop selling direct issues, and they've got to start getting in touch with the clients, with the voters' dominant buying motive. What make the Republicans have already done that.
Mm-hmm.
They got white people to vote against their own economic self-interest in order to put somebody in that's already told you, I am going to take your grandmama's health care away.
Well,
Go for them anyway.
And they're going to vote for him anyway. Let's talk real quick before we run out of time here. We got about 4 minutes left. Part of that, I heard Michelle Obama, and we played it in the opening montage. They tried to get her to talk negative about Eric Holder, saying if the Republicans are down, then you need to kick them, right? They wanted to start this whole conversation. Chuck Todd tried to bring that up with Stacey Abrams on Sunday on Meet the Press, that the Democrats should not, stoop to the level of what the Republicans are doing, and try to imply to Michelle Obama on the Today Show that by Holder saying kick them when they're down is equivalent to the stuff that Donald Trump does. What about that moral equivalence that they're trying to play with, saying that you have to be more aggressive, like you were just talking about, as opposed to some of the things like Trump says, like beat them up? What's the difference between what Eric Holder said and what Trump normally says?
Well, first of all, there's not a whole lot of difference, but you can't let the other side decide the narrative for you. If that ain't what you want to talk about, change the subjects. Republicans do it all the time. It's as though we feel we have to discuss this because they brought it up, and because we're always in the business of explaining. I think too many progressives and liberals think if they get the opportunity, they can explain their position and their motive better than the other guy and have a third party to side with them than the other guy. And maybe they will, or maybe they can, but the Republicans have changed the rules of the game, and that ain't how the game is decided. They've gone in and snatched the emotional issues. So these court, other things that we used to call bread and butter issues, they don't work anymore. Mm-hmm. And one last thing, I like to end with my favorite slogan here. I quote Mark Twain. When Mark Twain said, it's much easier to fool somebody than it is to go back and convince them that they've been fooled. You see, Republicans have fooled these people, okay? We're coming behind Republicans trying to convince them that, hey, you've been fooled, man. It's too tough to do that. We got to take another approach. Well, and we need to be working on that right now. You can't wait until after the election. We got to start working on that right now. The Democrats need to be about the business of just starting all over again. They need to start all over again because this paradigm that they have now, it's this dog won't hunt.
Well, that's very dramatic advice, and I think it's what the Democrats need. They need a kick in the rear, because if they lose this time around, Val, it's going to be hard to come back in 2020. Here's an opportunity for the Democrats to make some headway, at least take the House back and win some of these races in the states, like Stacey Abrams down in Georgia, or Mike Espy in Mississippi, and even Linda Coleman here in North Carolina. If we don't make victories now, it's going to be harder and harder to come by.
Amen.
Well, Val Atkinson, I want to thank you for spending the hour with us today. We'll be back next Tuesday, and I'm going to invite you back next Tuesday, because I think every Tuesday through election, we want to be here to talk about voting, what's going on in the world, in national issues. So, Val, thanks for joining us tonight on The Deal.
You're welcome.
And that's Val Atkinson. He's been live with us from Holly Springs, North Carolina on The Deal. We want you to come back next Tuesday. We want you to invite other people to come back. There's going to be more issues to talk about. We'll be broadcasting live from downtown Raleigh. and we'll be here for the hour. We want you to really participate. 833-255-7171. Write that number down. It's too late for tonight. I saw people trying to call in. Again, just be patient. Don't worry about the electronic voice that comes on. They're just going to ask you for a little bit of information. We want you to participate. In the meantime, try to have a good rest of the week. We'll be back here again at 8 o'clock next Tuesday. And you've been watching The Deal with Ed Clark and our guest Val Atkinson. And make sure that you're getting people out to vote as well. We'll see you next Tuesday night at 8.
Call Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Michelle.
Hey, Lynn, are you registered to vote?
Of course. I am not throwing away my opportunity to make my voice heard this November.
If we really want our voices to be heard, we need to vote in every election, not just for president, but for every office, school board, state house, senate, all of them. Can you help me get people registered?
Okay, I'm already on it.
Well, keep up the good